So today I'm looking at Nas, um, very popular New York rapper. Some would say one of the greatest, if not the greatest, of all the New York rappers or rappers in total. He certainly has a huge legacy behind him and bevy of albums to get through, which is why this is going to take me a bit of a while to accomplish. So for the purpose of this list, we're looking at solo albums, solo studio albums, as well as the lost tape projects, which people have tended to include in their lists. So this isn't going to look at the QB's Finest compilation, the Firm's group album, or the duo album Distant Relatives with Damian Marley. Maybe they'll be explored some other time, but for the purpose, we're just looking at the studio albums as well as the lost tape albums. So that means we have 15 to get through, so brace yourselves. At number 15, fairly obvious this one, Nostradamus. So, yes, released in November 1999. Famously released due to the previous album I Am, which we'll look at later, originally being a double disc project. A great deal of that material leaked, so it was all condensed just to a single disc release. Some of the Nostradamus was supposed to be all of the other material for the album, but he decided to record some new material for us, I suppose, to freshen it up, give the label something to sell, more commercial viability. It's well regarded as Nas's worst album. It's not a bad album overall. Certainly for a lesser artist, it would be quite a decent album. It's just, unfortunately, it's not a very good Nas album. It starts off fairly well with the prediction intro going into Life We Chose, giving more of a kind of apocalyptic feel, sort of like the end of the millennium leading into the new millennium. Production on here mostly handled by LES and Dame Grease, which gives it an overall, hardcore New York feel. But this does mean that a lot of the other songs on the album kind of fall into Nas trying to gain his street credibility. So it's a lot of kind of just hardcore gangster rap, which is fine in places, but having an entire album of it when it's not as prevalent on other albums, it's not Nas's favoured style, it does bring the album down a fair bit. We certainly do have highlights on the album, the most notable one being Project Windows featuring Ron Isley, one of the songs which was going to be on I Am, which has a very sort of introspective feel to it, followed closely by Come Get Me, produced by DJ Premier, which kind of feeds into the Jay-Z and Nas beef with a few lines in there. I mean, notably, it's the songs that were going to be on I Am that are the stronger tracks. The ones that have sort of been added on, like the singles, Nostradamus and the Timbaland produced You Owe Me featuring Genuine, are not particularly interesting or well done. Certainly You Owe Me is not one of Timbaland's better beats. The content itself is fairly New Worlds with the Toto Africa sample, looking at the new millennium approaching in kind of a celebratory fashion, is fairly well done. That's probably the only additional added song to this that actually works for the album. 'Cause it does, look at the possibilities of the new world with growing technology and things like that. But I say a lot of the album is just fairly substandard street stuff, which doesn't really fly that well. I mean, there's some nice appearances on there from Mobb Deep, Bravehearts, Millennium Thugs, slash Nation. But none of these. When Nas isn't at his best, he can't really. The artists around him aren't really doing that well either. I feel so. Yeah, no one comes out of this too well, and yeah, it's overall not a great album. So we now go number 14, Nazir, um, released in June 2018 as part of Kanye West's 7-track album releases with Kanye's own release at that time, his release with Kid Cudi, the Pusha T album, and the Tiana Taylor album. So this was the fourth of those releases. While it's sort of, it feels like a momentous occasion to have Kanye producing an entire Nas album. This did kind of come 10 years, 15 years too late. Both of them are kind of past their peak at this point. And yeah, none of the album, I mean, for a start, just calling the album Nazir is fairly lazy. Why decide to make that a self-titled project feels a bit bizarre. The idea behind this album being 7 tracks is supposed to be each of the songs represents one of the 7 sins. They fairly loosely do. I mean, opener Not For Radio is, I believe, supposed to be Pride, and it's kind of a braggadocious sort of song. That's basically the Pride element of it. Say everything is fairly loosely related to these ideas. So I bring the idea of releasing a 7-track project is to cut out the filler that can happen on albums, particularly on hip hop albums, which can go overly long. I mean, there's certainly no album that couldn't be edited down by 7 tracks, and by that I include 7-track albums. All the songs on here, it's not a much better quality than Nostradamus. Highlight probably being the sort of single Cop Shot the Kid with Slick Rick sample in the chorus, a Rich Pryor sample as well. Kanye also adding a verse to the song. It looks generally at police brutality, which isn't an uncommon subject to Nas or hip hop generally, but it's nice to see it being tackled again. Everything, which is like 7.5 minutes, easily the longest track on the album, perhaps unnecessarily so. They're supposed to represent the greed, and I suppose being 3 times longer than most of the other songs on the album is certainly quite greedy. Kanye has a nice vocal chorus on the track. A lot of the song though is the intros and the outros. Nas only appears at like 2 minutes into the song. So while it's supposed to feel, epic, I suppose, it does just kind of come off excessive in the end. Then we end with Simple Things, which is another one of the very short songs, and kind of like feels like it just cuts off halfway through Nas's verse, which it's only the second verse. It's, song is like 2.5 minutes. A very kind of bizarre album overall, and fairly inconsequential an album. So yeah, pretty low down in terms of the overall discography. So next, number 13, we get the first, well, our first look at a Lost Tapes project. We're going Lost Tapes 2. So this was released a year after Nazir. So part of this album was released as part of the as the Lost. I suppose it's going to become Lost Tapes saga, as it were, but released on Def Jam as sort of taking the unreleased tracks from the Def Jam section of his career. So Hip Hop Is Dead, Untitled, Life Is Good, the album that was going to happen before Nasir happened. Whereas with the original Lost Tapes, using a lot of the material that was going to be used for I Am, you could see how that material would have kind of benefited the album. A lot of the material on here doesn't really fit into. So it certainly doesn't feel like any of the albums are missing any of these songs. They are just kind of a bunch of leftover songs thrown together. Two of the stronger songs on there, Royalty, which features a Frank Ocean written, I believe he was originally supposed to perform the chorus, but is instead performed by Ravon, as well as the closing track, Beautiful Life, which also features Ravon on the chorus. This song was initially going to be the outro to Life Is Good. Was cut due to some of the things that Nas talks about in regards to his divorce at the time. And this, you could actually see how this would make for quite a good outro to the song, to the album. It's a long song, but it feels like an album closer. With kind of like the closure it brings in the content and in regards to the personal content of that album. There's other tracks like the Kanye West produced "You Mean the World to Me," which was cut from Hip Hop Is Dead, is a fine song, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to. It doesn't necessarily fill any gaps from Hip Hop Is Dead. And this is kind of what we get a lot of throughout the album. While there is great production on here, likes of RZA, Alchemist, Pete Rock, The Neptunes, Swiss Beats, No ID. I think Hit Boy, to precede the upcoming relationship between the two of them. Again, there's very few tracks on here which would necessarily have made any of those albums better. A lot of the tracks also appear to be quite recently recorded songs, so they're not actually from any of the actual released albums. They are just songs that would have made an album. The album, presumably, that would have been. That would have happened instead of Nasir. In which case, actually, the material on here would have probably made a better album than Nasir, but it certainly wouldn't have been one of the stronger albums anyway. So it's a fine collector's edition to the discography, but there's not a lot on there to necessarily take home. There's Queensbridge Politics, which looks at towards the end of the album, which looks at things that happen in the area of Queensbridge, the death of Queensbridge rapper Prodigy, how his mural was defaced after his death. And while looking at that is an interesting thing, Queen's Wolf, which I think was supposed to have been for Untitled. Again, it's not always clear what albums these would have been cut from, which explores a kind of a werewolf, teen wolf concept, which could have gone a bit further in exploring the concept. Yeah, there's nice ideas throughout the album. Perhaps if some of these songs were works on, stronger for the purpose of an album, they would have turned out better. But yeah, for what they kind of are what they are, really, which is okay, but not a lot. So, number 12, we are going to go with Street's Disciple. Released in November 2004, this was kind of the final of Nas's Sony and Columbia albums. This is a double disc release. I don't know whether this was to kind of just for Nas to say that he released a double disc album, whether it was to end his contract so he could explore other options with other labels. He would sign to Def Jam after this, not straight away after this. So I don't know if this necessarily played a part into finishing his contract or anything. Just because I'm not entirely sure why at this stage in his career he would have released a double disc project. There doesn't seem to be much basis to it. There's no differentiation really between the two discs at all. Disc 1 has some interesting songs. We have the Political American Way, produced by Q-Tip and feature Khalees. These Are Our Heroes, which looks at black role models and the idea of black sellouts. We feature as well 2 tracks with Niles pretending to be a woman, just by his voice being altered, which, to be fair, it's not obvious that it's Nas's voice. It does actually sound like a female voice. It's not, if you listen really carefully, you can kind of hear Nas's inflections in it. But it doesn't really serve any purpose to either of the songs. I mean, if neither of the songs really feel as though they need a female voice, and if that's what was required, surely there are female artists out there who could have been part of the album, considering the album is fairly devoid of female, and Nas's albums quite often are fairly devoid of female voices. This may have been a good opportunity to do that, but regardless, it doesn't come off that well, and kind of one of the weaker sections of the album. We then pick up a little bit with Rest of My Life featuring A. Marie, Just a Moment with Quan, all very introspective and worldly songs looking at issues around the world. Reason with Emily as well. Second disc, we start with one of the strongest lyrically songs on the album, Suicide Bounce, featuring Busta Rhymes on the chorus and Quan again for the outro. Nas really feels quite furious over this almost tribal sounding beat, which really sort of gets the album pumping to start with. We get Street's Disciple. There's on disc 2 there's a song called Street's Disciple. On the previous disc there's a song called Disciple. So again, ideas were kind of running thin at this point, but But we do get some cool songs with the unauthorized biography of Rakim, Virgo, a collaboration with Ludacris and Dougie Fresh. We then get a bit of a sort of the kind of the marriage section of the album. At the time, obviously, Nas was getting married to Khalees. So we get Remember the Times, a look back on all the women that Nas has slept with before being married, Makings of a Perfect Bitch, looking at how to make the perfect sexual companion, getting married with the actual telling of being married. All these songs kind of drag it down a bit. But we then pick up again with No One Else in the Room featuring Maxwell. A very, very funky sounding song. Not a sound that Nas really gone with before or since. Which is a shame because he actually does do it quite well. And it really picks the album up again. Similarly, after this with Bridging the Gap featuring his father Oludara. With the Manish Boy sort of bluesy jazz sample, which Nas was able to carry off really well, or discussing his childhood and relationship with his father. Then featuring with War with Keon Bryce and Me and You, a song about his growing daughter. We also have Thief's Theme as a bonus track as well on this version, a remix featuring UK rapper Rising Sun. Even though it was sort of the lead single, Thief's Theme kind of feels a bit unnecessary to the album. If it's like to try and create a grimy, gritty lead single, which it is, it's not one of Nas's stronger songs. So yeah, overall the album is fairly patchy. Production overall is kind of mainly kept to LES again, Salaam Remi and the late Bad Boy producer Chucky Thompson. With also production from Q-Tip, Buck Wild, and a couple of spread through there. But overall, it's an album that really should have been edited down and given more of a direction. It just feels very excessive and lacking in places. So next up we go to number 11, King's Disease, one of the recently released albums, sort of as just part of Nas's Mass Appeal label, released in 2020. Yeah. So it's summer of 2020. Produced entirely by Hit Boy with production from additional production from other assistant producers. So King's Disease is sort of a look at in a bit of a similar vein to Nasir, looking at the excesses of lavish lifestyle and how it can affect you. The King's Disease or gout being having too much food and wine sort of affects your insides. The actual concept doesn't rear its head too much. Is in a way a bit of a throwback album of like Nas looking at telling old stories from his neighborhood. Hit Boy, the risk of having one producer produce the entirety of the album is it can run the risk of sound a bit samey. Hit Boy does a decent job of not making it too not making any of the songs too similar. There's certainly a nice mixture of more trappy beats, soul samples, more of a more lavish, lush production. Um, and Nas still sounds, still sounds, good as a rapper. He still has his lyrics, even though he's slowed down a bit by this point. He still has, good punchlines. Can tell good stories. Um, there's full circle towards the end of the album, which brings back the firm, AZ, Cormega, and Foxy Brown, as well as producer Dr. Dre, who helped a lot with the firm to give an outro, anointing Hit Boy as one of his favourite producers. This kind of random thing he does every now and again where he calls a producer one of his favourites and nothing really comes of it, but it's cool to have the co-sign anyway, and it good to sort of get all of them back on there. Helps kind of bring things full circle, bring a group back from his early stages. Helps give the album that rounded feel. So then the last few tracks kind of look more at the King's Disease idea, with tracks like The Cure, and with the definition at the intro, which kind of helps establish as well. But again, a lot of the album itself doesn't really look too much at this idea, which kind of brings it down a bit. I don't know if Nas felt that he didn't have enough to explore in terms of that concept. Not that the album itself necessarily needed to follow it completely. I just felt that it would have been interesting, considering how great a storyteller and the concept artist Nas is. It would have been interesting to try and keep with the concept a bit more, but for what the album is, it's sort of, it definitely feels like a regeneration for him. So I'm cool with that. And next, at number 10, we have the sequel, King's Disease 2. Basically, the album which was released earlier in August 2021, so pretty much a year after King's Disease. They felt they were on a winning streak, having won his first ever Grammy for Best Hip Hop Album for King's Disease. So now with King's Disease 2, so see if we can get another one. Let's kind of follow the same kind of the same sort of ideals as the first album in terms of production and concepts. It does feel a bit more cohesive this time round, though, which is why I kind of put this slightly above King's Disease. I mean, perhaps if you combined the songs from both the albums, you might get a very strong overall project. So I mean, this one has similar ups and downs to the previous one, but some very strong moments as well. Death Row East being a very notable highlight on the album, looking at the death of Tupac and the ideas of starting the Death Row East label, the discussions that him and Tupac were having around this kind of time before Tupac was murdered. Resolving their issues just before his passing. So again, in terms of being able to tell an old story, a tale that's about 25 years old at this point, and still manage to sound fresh and bring something new to the table. It's cool to see. Nobody with Lauryn Hill, bringing Lauryn Hill back for an album, looking at the idea of just being able to be away from everyone and be anonymous, despite being at the top of your game and the top of your fame. It's again, one of the highlights of the album. Lauryn Hill has a really, extended and well done verse on here, and if you're going to have anyone to discuss the parallels between the success and the wanting to be away from it all, I mean, there's not many people better to get for that idea. We also get Eminem appearing on EPMD 2, the sequel to the EPMD song, which was released on the Judas and Black Messiah soundtrack, which also features on this version EPMD. And while it's a really momentous occasion getting Nas, EPMD, and Eminem all on the same song together, again, it's a bit late to do something like this. I mean, you think of when 20 years earlier, Eminem was working on Renegade with Jay-Z and sound really great there. That it feel that would have been a better time to try and actually get on a song. Here he sounds fine, but is clearly not at his peak. Neither is Nas necessarily. So again, just having a song, their first collaboration, and being at a point where they're both kind of lacking is a bit of a shame. M's always been very good at being able to show respect to the old school, to the older artists such as EPMD. Gives a nice shout out to some of the recently deceased members of the hip hop community. But the song itself is just kind of there in a way. It's probably one of the stronger songs on the album, but it's not an amazing track at all. And this is it for kind of both these albums, really. There's some very fine moments on there. It's not quite, neither of these are quite the return to form that people were perhaps expecting or believe these albums to be, but they are decent overall and certainly worth listening to. Again, maybe they would have been better served as one entire project rather than two. The possibility of another one coming out, I'm not sure if that is at all required, but we'll just have to see how we go from there. Right, so we are number 9 now, aren't we? Yes, number 9, yes, make sure I get it all right. It's only playing because I know the internet's going to hate me for this one. Stillmatic. Right. Yes. So, December 2001, one of the album kind of seen as the revitalization of Nas after the disaster that was Nostradamus. Infamously features the diss song Ether, the response to Jay-Z's takeover. And, the Stillmatic intro is, it sounds really, really good, and, it's got great lyrics to it. It's certainly feels like the kind of the Illmatic style, the early mid-90s. Ether is a very vicious diss track, even if it's perhaps more opinion based than Takeover, which is more fact based. But I mean, aside from after this, it does get kind of patchy as an album, which is why I feel it's not quite the return to form that people often say it is. I mean, Smoking after Ether and Got Yourself a Gun is fairly dull. You're the Man with the Sugar Man sample is well done. DJ Premier appears to give some of the album highlights, which kind of feel more in that Illmatic vein again, with the storytelling Rewind and Second Childhood. One Mic is a very well done song playing with tempos and sounds of very slow and quiet, and then building up as the verses progress, and then reversing it for the final verse, of starting off really high and then bringing all the sounds down again as the verse gets quieter, which, again, a very well done performance. A strong highlight of the album. Then after that, we have Destroy and Rebuild, which looks at artists from Nas's own area again, Queensbridge, and kind of as a way of kind of separating the strong from the weak, kind of going after artists they feels are disloyal, or has an issue with, takes umbrage with for some reason. When you've already got a very heavy diss song on the album, and don't really feel this was required, nor was it that necessary, I feel, to bring some of these issues up on some, particularly when you've only just released the Queensbridge Finest compilation, which featured these artists on there. It felt very erratic. The Flyest with AZ is possibly their weakest collaboration. Apart from the third verse where they go back and forth a bit, neither of them sound particularly good on here. Which is weird because the song 10 Rings on King's Disease is supposed to be they take part of it from the song The Flyers as kind of inspiration. There's a Peace King, which says in the song. Why you'd want to reference this song is a bit beyond me, but anyway. We have Rule featuring Amory again, which is kind of an updated version of Nas's earlier If I Ruled the World, using instead Tears for Fears, Everyone Wants to Rule the World as a sample. It's which is a fine song. It's not quite as good as the initial as an initial song, but it's fine for what it is. Then we kind of build up again a bit for the outro tracks. My Country with Millennium Thug again, who or better known as Nation sometimes, as Nas's cousin. Just looking at the idea of the US government and how it treats young black people, the idea of being told that how well your country is going to take care of you and give you things, and in reality it's not quite what it seems. One of the stronger tracks on the album, and great to kind of like build the album up again. What Goes Around after this, featuring Keon Bryce, is a bit of a mixed effort. While again it's nice looking at the way that the US can treat black people. Some of it is a little bit difficult to take in. The idea of being poisoned by the world around you, including vaccinations, which gets brought up a little bit on Everything from Nasir. So that when that happened, it's certainly not the first time that he's spoken about these things. But so the vaccination issue is a bit of a tricky one to go through. There's also a bit of homophobia towards the end of the song as well. So again, there's not. While it's a great sounding track, some of the ideas on there aren't perfect. And that is kind of like the way that the album ends, really, as kind of a bit telling of some great ideas, but some ones that aren't quite as well thought out and perhaps bring things down a bit. Apart from the bonus track Every Ghetto, There was also the song on the initial pressings, Braveheart Party, produced by Swiss Beats, featuring Braveheart and Mary J. Blige, which has been sort of cut from all subsequent releases because Mary J. Blige didn't approve of vocals or something like that. Um, which I mean, I don't know if it is able. I'm sure it's able to be found somewhere on YouTube. I don't know how much that song would have actually helped the album if it was on there, because at least it does have a bit of a different feel um, to a lot of the other songs. Again, I mean, it's a it's a fine album, but there's a lot of things on it that do kind of hit the wrong chord and kind of bring it down quite a bit, which is why I feel the album isn't quite as strong as a lot of people make it out to be. Sorry, internet, but I just don't. Okay, so now number 8, we go to Life is Good. So July 2012, release again on Def Jam, just like the Hip Hop is Dead and Untitled albums, which we will be getting to. Spoiler alert. This is kind of a bit of a conclusion to that run of albums, even though you had Nazir after that, which was also a Def Jam album. But this is kind of like the real conclusion to it, as it were. It kind of follows on from that strong run of albums. Again, spoiler. So a lot of this is kind of like Nazir's really quite mature stage, just looking at where he is at his life at this point. The failing relationship with Khalees, how he is as kind of like an elder statesman in hip hop at this stage. Again, looking at some of things from his past, his childhood growing up. There's a lot to sort of look at throughout the album. Not all of it is perhaps as strong as things that have been covered before by him, but overall it is a well done, again, mature album, a closure album. Getting closure on his failed relationship, and his status as one of the legends and veterans of hip hop at that time. Having been in the game for 20 years by that point, which explores on tracks such as the bonus track "Nasty." Some of the bonus tracks actually are really, really strong on this album. We get particularly "Where Is the Love," which again just looks at the idea of the younger generation and how he is viewed by them, the differences between them and how things aren't really that different in terms of the way they're viewed by the outside world. Looking at people from his past, the death of Biggie Smalls gets brought up a little bit, and how that's affected people in the community. We get, a lot of the production comes from No ID, which helps give it that kind of more nostalgic feel. We get tracks such as Daughters, which looks again at his daughter and just how things, his relationship with her as a father, how his it's kind of critiquing his own parenting of her, how he may not have always been around for her, maybe not always given her the best advice, and how their ideals kind of differentiate. We get Cherry Wine, featuring a posthumous appearance from Amy Winehouse. A nice kind of a soulful sounding track, which then we finish off with Bye Baby. Again, not originally supposed to be the actual final song of the album, but is a decent closer. Just again looking at the end of his relationship with Aaron Hall helping with the chorus. So yeah, while there are spots of the album that aren't too strong, and there's things that may have been explored better in on other albums. Overall, it's a strong album. Again, very nostalgic and mature. And I mean, if that had been Nas's final album, I think it would have been a good one to go out on. So very strong overall. And that is where I'm going to end it for the time being, because there are so many albums to look through. I've decided we're going to split this into two halves. So we're about halfway through the discography now, so we'll just have to see how we go for the final half of the discography at a later date. So stay tuned.